Okay, so at the end of the previous chapter, Phineas has just made his unsuccessful maiden speech in the House of Commons in support of Mr. Mildmay's Reform Bill. Lady Laura is anxious to find out how Phineas's speech went and asks her husband and father, who were both there. Mr. Kennedy tells her it wasn't a success. There was a good deal of it you could hardly hear. Lord Brentford says the less said about it, the better. He also says that if Mr. Mildmay's bill is defeated and this leads to a general election, then Phineas will probably lose his seat since he only got it by an accident. Violet and Lady Laura discuss between themselves whether in that case Lord Brentford should induce his borough of Loughton to elect Phineas, or whether Lord Chiltern has the better right to it. The narrator comments, "The reader will remember that both Lord Brentford and his daughter were thorough reformers. The use of a little pocket borough of his own, however, is a convenience to a great peer." The two women then move on to discussing Phineas as a potential husband. Lady Laura admits that she very nearly fell in love with him, except that he has no money, and she used all hers to pay her brother's debts, but he did tell her that he loved her. Violet, who has money of her own, claims to love him only in a sisterly way. Phineas reflects on the failure of his speech and concludes that, given his poverty and relatively humble birth, he is an imposter. He should have married Mary Flood Jones and worked as a barrister. To cap his sufferings, the next morning, he has another visit from Mr. Clarkson trying to collect on Lawrence Fitzgibbon's debt. Mr. Clarkson tells Phineas that if he doesn't want him coming to his lodgings, he'll seek him out at the House of Commons. Bunce, Phineas's landlord, is angry that he was arrested at the rally in support of the ballot after he objected to being prevented from shaking hands with his hero, Mr. Turnbull. Bunce wants to bring an action for false imprisonment and persists with this, despite being advised against it by his wife, Phineas, and Mr. Lowe. Phineas shows his support for Bunce by writing an article sympathetic to his position for the People's Banner. Mr. Slide, his contact there, tells Phineas that he hopes to become an MP himself one day and is trusting in electoral reform to free boroughs like Loughton from aristocratic influence. Phineas is disgusted and feels it would be better if Loughton was left in Lord Brentford's pocket than that it should be polluted by the presence of Mr. Quintus Slide. After days of speeches, the Reform Bill is voted on, and Mr. Clarkson chooses this moment to bother Phineas at the House of Commons about the debt. Phineas is embarrassed and angry with Lawrence. He cannot get him to take his distress seriously, and Lawrence clearly has no intention of trying to pay. He tells Phineas to entertain Mr. Clarkson at his lodgings 3 times a week and nothing else will happen. The vote is a tie, although technically carried by the Speaker's deciding vote, and the bill will therefore have to be withdrawn. Mr. Turnbull has thus defeated a Liberal bill on a point of principle. Cabinet meets to decide what the Liberals should do now. The narrator intervenes here to say that this is just what he imagines a cabinet meeting is like. It's so easy to make errors when writing fiction. Legal matters are a minefield, for example. But fortunately for him, only cabinet ministers themselves know what goes on in their meetings, and they will never tell. Sorry, that's my phone. I'm just going to ignore it. Mr. Mildmay accepts that he must resign as Prime Minister and will go to the Queen and suggests she sends for Lord de Terrier, the leader of the Conservatives. Since Lord de Terrier would be the Prime Minister of a minority government, he might refuse to form such a government. And in the event the Liberals are asked to continue in power, although Mr. Mildmay is to dissolve Parliament at the end of the session. Mr. Kennedy is made Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and thus joins the Cabinet. Lord Chiltern is brought to London to continue his recovery from his hunting accident, and he lodges at the Bunces since he is still estranged from his father and dislikes his brother-in-law, Mr. Kennedy, so much. Phineas bravely saves Mr. Kennedy from being garroted after they walk home together from a dinner party. Lord Chiltern says he would have lent the muggers a hand had he been there instead of Phineas. It is quickly known in Parliament and beyond that Phineas, that child of fortune, has saved Mr. Kennedy's neck and valuables, if not his life. Phineas makes a succinct and useful speech in the House of Commons on the subject of potted peas. He has been sitting on the potted peas committee, and this time around he finds speaking easy, since he merely says something which he had to say. However, he reflects bitterly that he has overcome his difficulties too late. Lord Tuller, who effectively gave him the seat of Loch Shane, is not going to do so again since he has reconciled with his brother. Phineas goes to visit the invalid, and the narrator has a lot of fun suggesting Mr. Kennedy is making the most of his injuries. He could not turn his neck, or thought he could not do so. Lady Laura tells Phineas that her father wants him to stand for the borough of Loughton. Phineas reflects that, though he longs, in his very heart of hearts, to root out forever the last vestige of close borough nominations, so long as they do still exist, it's better for them to be given to Liberals, and therefore why not to him? Quote, the logic of this argument seemed to him to be perfect. Having checked that Lord Chiltern really doesn't want the seat himself, Phineas tells Lord Brentford he would like to accept his offer. And his good fortune continues when Aspasia Fitzgibbon, Lawrence's sister, pays off Mr. Clarkson. Phineas is very grateful and promises never to have any more financial dealings with Lawrence. Phineas spends one day in Loughton being introduced to Lord Brentford's loyal supporters, noting that they think it rather a fine thing to be thus held in the hand by an English nobleman, even as Parliament works on freeing them from this. Phineas goes on to Loch Linter, Mr. Kennedy's estate in Scotland, but finds it very dull. He decides that he will now declare his passion to Violet, and with a spectacular lack of insight, plans to get Lady Laura to help him. Lady Laura tells Phineas she now feels it is a great curse to have been born a woman because her scope of action is so limited. She also tells him that her marriage was a mistake and he should keep his distance from her from now on. Lady Laura married Mr. Kennedy so she might be able to do something in the world. However, all he will allow her to do is sit at home and look after his welfare. Mr. Kennedy is cold and controlling, and Lady Laura tells Phineas that she and her father are afraid of him. Phineas is perceptive enough to refrain from telling her of his love for Violet. Phineas makes one speech at Loughton and is elected without opposition. Lord Brentford claims there is no Conservative feeling in the place, but Phineas is sure that the borough would have voted Conservative if Lord Brentford had been a Tory peer. His tenants are all either on very short leases or no leases at all, and thus under his influence. Phineas returns to London and Mr. Slide complains that he feels badly treated because Phineas knew he, Quintus, had his eye on the pocket borough of Loughton. He asks Phineas to agree to let him have it next time. Phineas is appalled and tells him that, in any case, reform will have done away with the borough by the time of the next election. Quintus vents his feelings in an article in the newspaper criticising Phineas and Lord Brentford. Phineas goes to Loughton because he wants to propose to Violet, who is staying at Salisbury Castle. He uses as an excuse for his visit a message from Lord Chiltern to his father that he is ready to make the legal arrangements to reimburse Lady Laura out of his inheritance. Lord Brentford is delighted and sees this as ushering in the match between Violet and his son. Phineas is scrupulous in writing to Lord Chiltern of his own intention to propose to Violet when he relays Lord Brentford's reply. He does manage to tell Violet of his feelings for her, but she refuses to listen to him. The country has returned another Liberal government, but Parliament is not to sit until February, so Phineas goes home to Ireland for 6 months. He wonders if Violet might still accept him and considers it his duty to be constant to her. He discovers, to his surprise, that he is not to see Mary Flood Jones, who he knows would marry him tomorrow, because it is felt he has behaved badly to her. And this is a quotation. Now that he was in Ireland, he thought that he did love dear Mary very dearly. He felt that he had two identities, that he was, as it were, two separate persons, and that he could, without any real faithlessness, be very much in love with Violet Effingham in his position of man of fashion and member of Parliament in England, and also warmly attached to dear little Mary Flood Jones as an Irishman of Killaloe. Phineas inherits £3,000 from a great aunt, and his father won't accept any of it, so after paying his debts, he returns to London £2,500 richer. The main business of Parliament is to be a reform bill, but the narrator claims that the demand for electoral reform is not coming from the bottom up, from the dissatisfaction of the masses. Rather, it is men like Mr. Turnbull who are agitating for reform with the help of the press and inciting the working class. Both political parties accept that reform must come and realise that the sooner a bill can be passed, the fewer concessions may be made. Many Liberals and all the Conservatives have no real desire for reform, and the narrator uses the metaphor of a coach running down a hill but with the brakes on. However, Mr. Monk is entirely committed to reform because he believes it is demanded by justice and is a debt due to the people, and he writes to Phineas about his vision for a House of Commons truly representative of its electors. Lady Laura returns to London and sends for Phineas, telling him to forget what she said about keeping his distance. It is clear to Phineas that the Kennedys' marriage is not a happy one, and this does not surprise him, but he concludes that there are plenty of people in the same position, and Lady Laura must simply endure the mode of life she had prepared for herself. Phineas makes an appointment with Lord Chiltern, who never replied to his letter about Violet. The new reform bill is introduced in Parliament, and it is not very different from the old one. There is still no provision for a secret ballot, and Mr. Turnbull is still furious about this. The Conservatives are not going to try to defeat the bill in a vote, but rather water it down at committee stage. Phineas succeeds in speaking in support of the bill and is congratulated by Barrington Erle. He has come into form at last. Phineas has his meeting with Lord Chiltern, and it turns out that Phineas's letter has only just reached him. Lord Chiltern tells Phineas it was ungentlemanly of him to court Violet when he knew how he, Lord Chiltern, felt about her. He challenges Phineas to a duel on the grounds of Phineas's falseness to him. Phineas begins to wonder if he has acted entirely honestly and is forced to accept Lord Chiltern's challenge. The duel is fought in Belgium, and the duellers and their seconds go to great lengths to keep it a secret. Lord Chiltern shoots Phineas in the shoulder. Phineas does not even aim at his opponent. Despite having to rest after having the bullet removed, Phineas returns in time to vote on the reform bill, which is passed to the committee stage. He claims to have been in Kent, though everyone finds his absence mysterious. Phineas hopes the matter is now settled and will not cause a rift with Lord Chiltern's family, particularly if it can be kept a secret. However, his enemy, Mr. Slide, hints at the fact that Phineas has been in a duel in the People's Banner. Phineas decides again to tell Lady Laura that he loves Violet and to ask for her help. The narrator comments that Phineas must have forgotten what he knows of Lady Laura, and that this also shows that, quotes, he had not learned as much as his opportunities might have taught him. He overlooks her loyalty to her brother, but more importantly, he disregards the fact that she has admitted to having feelings for him. Had he not been beautifully ignorant and most modestly blind, he would surely have placed his confidence elsewhere. Lady Laura is outraged by what Phineas asks of her and tells him he is dishonourable in seeking to court Violet. She accuses him of being fickle and suggests he will get over Violet easily if he puts his mind to it. Phineas wants to retort that it is better to be fickle than to marry without love, but chivalrously refrains. Light dawns on Phineas, and the two part, having made up to an extent. Lady Laura will not help him with Violet, but she will keep his secret and will not damage his standing with her father. And the chapter ends with Lady Laura refusing to explain the cause of her distress to her husband, the narrator ominously foreshadowing the difficulties to come. not thinking of it as a trouble which would do more than make him uncomfortable for that day. And that is the end of my summary. So I have some questions. Sorry, go on. I have some questions which Dominic's going to put on the screen, which we might want to think about. So I can just quickly read them out. So Phineas notes at one point that all his acquaintances call him by his Christian name, his first name. And that started me thinking, why is everyone so fond of him? Are there some characters who are less enamoured of him? And are we, the reader, as fond of him as the characters are? And then the question of to what extent Lord Chiltern is right to feel betrayed by Phineas. And then the last one, I struggled to put it into a question really, but I was thinking about this whole idea of Trollope's narrator claiming that reform is something people have to be sort of shown that they want, sort of dragged into. So Lady Laura doesn't really think that women should have the vote. And obviously the Loughton elector's quite happy to just do what Lord Brentford wants. Anyway, so that was just a question about whether change is always brought about by people having to have it explained to them what they should really want. Anyway, and that's the end.